we're going to read in English. It doesn't sound half as nice in English as it does in Portuguese. Manuel Barros, he's still alive, he's an elderly man now, but his inspiration for his poetry has always been his own childhood. He keeps going back to that world of being very young and his impressions that came to him from the world. So as an older man, he keeps revisiting, reliving those moments. And they come out very beautifully in his poetry. Unfortunately, not very much of it is translated yet. And the first one I want to read is called Song of Seeing. I'll read it twice, because with poetry, always hearing it the first time can be a bit confusing. So I'm going to read it twice. Okay? Having lived many years in the scrub grass, in the way of birds, the boy took on a bird's kind of stare. He obtained a fountain-esque vision. He observed things the way birds observe them, all the unnamed things. Water wasn't the word water yet. Rock wasn't the word rock yet. And such words were free of grammar and could inhabit any position. So it was the boy could inaugurate them as he pleased. He could give rocks the costume of a flower. He could give song to the form of the sun. And if he wanted to fit into a bee, it was only a matter of opening the word bee and stepping inside it, as if it were the infancy of language. This wonderful portrait of the child being able to enter into the world, and even become into a bee through the power of his imagination. I'll read it again. Having lived for many years in the scrub grass, in the way of birds, the boy took on a bird's kind of stare. He obtained a fountain-esque vision. He observed things the way the birds observed them, all the unnamed things. Water wasn't the word water yet. Rock wasn't the word rock yet. And such words were free of grammar and could inhabit any position. So it was the boy could inaugurate them as he pleased. He could give rocks the costume of the flower. He could give song to the form of the sun. And if he wanted to fit into a bee, it was only a matter of opening the word bee and stepping inside it, as if it were the infancy of language. Beautiful. This quality of going beyond just the formation of the word, the naming of things, and being able to see beyond that into the things through the power of his imagination. And of course, as adults, we tend to get stuck in our words. Our words can be little boxes. We analyze, we categorize, we put them where they belong so we can formulate and understand and quantify things. And yet for the child, they go far beyond that. And that really is the language of children, the speech of children. To go beyond that imprisonment that we create for ourselves as we get older in the words because we want to understand. But that's a different form of understanding. And this is play. This is playfulness. And it's what play leads to the arts of being human, the art of being a human being. And it's that quality of play that is exhibited in that poem. In Swedish, there are two words for play, I discovered. One is spel. Yes, that's Nordic language, spiel, whatever, play. But they also have another word called lek. And lek is a different aspect of play, where you find joy in the world. where you find well-being in yourself. And then it's lek, not just spell. We have many games, there's Spiel. Yes, we create rules for many of our games. But in lek, you go beyond the rules. You almost taste the quality of enjoyment that you can find in playfulness and in play. And the heart of playfulness is our connection to the world, which is why children play. We can find many utilitarian uses for play. We can formulate why it's useful that we create relationships to the world. We move, which helps the formation of the brain. We live with others. We learn to deal with conflict. We learn to deal with the material world or disappointment. Those are many sort of utilitarian formulations we give. This is why we play. But lek goes beyond that. It means something beyond just we play because it leads us to certain skills or abilities as we get older. It's playing for the sake of playing. Just that. For the sake of it and the enjoyment of it and the well-being it confers on our children and on us. And it's a child's right. And it's the language of play which I think we as adults, if we want to really find a healthy relationship to our children, is in that language of play and playfulness that we have to refine what for many of us in some ways is lost. But we can refine it. And it's that moment when we can find that joyfulness in our children, that what our children actually give us. So often when we have our conferences and our meetings and our discussions, it's about what we give children. But we forget what they contribute to us, what gifts children bring us, because it's in a different dimension than our normal discourse. It's something beyond that. And all children come with these gifts. And if they're not abused or maltreated or destroyed in their childhood, or their childhood qualities are not destroyed, they can bring something that they give us. And so that playfulness lies at the heart. I have a little granddaughter. She's an absolute delight. You just feel with her she wants to be alive, just wants to be alive. So she's always wreathed in smiles and joy, just out of her nature. And I noticed that lately she's been trying to put on her shoes. She can't, but it doesn't matter. She sits on the chair and picks up her shoe and tries to put it on her foot. For me, putting on my shoes is not a game. Yeah. It's become a routine. You don't think it's a game we play. But out of the simple act of immersion into the world, of what she's seen and experienced, she's turned it into playfulness. And it doesn't matter that she can't do it. That's not the point. It's not a utilitarian exercise on learning how to put on shoes. It's just that joy of being with other human beings, imitating, immersion in what the world is, and then repeating it for herself again and again and again, wreathed in a smile each time. And that's the quality of play. Yeah? That quality of pleasure, of the moment, of spontaneity, of not of planning and formulation, but it's that capture of spontaneity, of the moment of childhood. It's a nice poem by Walt Whitman. I just read the 4 lines. Walt Whitman was a 19th century American poet. Very, how can I say, inspired by the sense of freedom that there was in America, the USA at that time. But it's rather beautifully put, what I've been trying to say. There was a child went forth every day, and the first object he looked on, he became. And that object became part of him for the day, or a certain part of the day, or for many years, or stretching cycles of years. Again, there was a child went forth every day, and the first object he looked on, that he became. And that object became part of him for the day, or a certain part of the day, or for many years, or stretching cycles of years. So a child absorbs what the objects become part of the child. And that can be for a moment, a second, an hour a day, or it could be for cycles of years. It goes into the child, deep into the soul of the child, and becomes part of them. And this is what play creates. That ability either to go into the bee, in the barrage bird, or let the bee come into you. And that is sort of what childhood is about, developing that relationship with oneself and with the world. And that is a language. And it's a language, I think, that we who wish to work with children or are concerned with childhood well-being have to relearn in a conscious way. Of course, for a child it's unconscious. It's part of being a child, natural part of being a child. But for us, it's something we have to refine in ourselves. And it's in that way, by refining the playfulness, the play quality in us, we can then learn again about what it means to be a child and use it to strengthen ourselves in our work and in our becoming in our lives, because life is always about becoming. We are never complete. We're never finished. And that is, I think, what a wonderful sort of verification of that in neuroscience, that the brain is always changing, is always plastic, neuroplasticity. So with us, we're also in the process of becoming. And if we can awaken that becomingness in us in a playful way, then we can find what the child brings. I said my granddaughter doesn't talk very much, but she's taught me a great deal in the last year and a half. And one of the things she has reaffirmed for me is hope and optimism and a belief, in spite of all we hear and see in the daily news rounds within the media, that life can be joy and life has a good purpose. And this is her lesson to me. But in a way we could be killing this off. There is a danger in what our modern world brings, where this natural quality, this natural language of childhood play is under threat. And this has been a theme that we've been looking at in the Alliance for Childhood since we started, 17 years ago, something like that. This constant worry that somehow our world doesn't allow the children to play in a way that they should or could. For not all children, of course, but for many children, it's under threat. And there was a report from the American Society of Pediatrics in 2007 that really highlighted this very strongly, that some children don't know how to play. They just don't know. And it sounds incredible. But according to their studies, and they're pediatricians, so they know, presumably, this is a terrible concern. Without play, how can you be a child? How can you really be a child? That quality of your imaginative life is stolen from you. And in fact, this wisdom of play goes back in Schiller's Aesthetics Letters. He actually described it very well. And this is going right back to 1770. The 1800s. The human being is only fully human when he plays. And he is playing only when he is fully human. The human being is only fully human when he plays, and he's only playing when he is fully human. That is the Aesthetic Letters of Schiller.
Schiller, are you writing?
Schiller, the famous German poet.
Schiller.
So play for Schiller, and I think for us, is really concerning what it means to be a human being, not just a child. But we're only fully human when we play. We need that quality, that spark, that lick, that joyfulness in life to really be grounded as a human being in our lives. Interesting, recent research has shown that parents find it more and more difficult to play with their children too. There's a wonderful research that came out quite recently looking at what children describing what it's like when their parents want to play with them. Not the parents' point of view, but the child's point of view, seeing what their parents are trying to do with them. This is the voice of the children. And it came out like this. nearly 1 in 3 parents chose to play computer games with their children, thinking that that's what kids would most enjoy. However, 9 out of 10 children said computer games was something they would rather play on their own, while 3/4 said they would prefer to spend time with their parents enjoying more traditional pursuits, such as challenging each other at board games or playing outdoors together. So parents think the children need to play in one way, computer games, and it's exactly what the children don't want. They want to do that themselves as they can now, with the new childhood that we have around us. They have that facility and that capability to find their own personal way into the world of computers. And it isn't a world where they find a connection to their parents, but we're blind to that. Perhaps also because it's a lot easier.
Do you have reference to this research? Christopher, where was this research?
Where was that written? This was a report called The State of Play, an interview with 2,000 parents and 2,000 children. Going back 2010. We also know play is important for us and our social awareness and social being. If we want to develop empathy and understanding for each other, there is a utilitarian purpose for play as well as the leg, and one shouldn't ignore that either. And we have a colleague in the States called Stuart Brown, Professor Stuart Brown, who's done a lot of research into serial killers. And he has found that many people who go on to commit these awful crimes do not have a history of play. He's interviewed them in prisons, and he's been doing this for 25, 30 years, and found that actually when people get to this point in their lives where they no longer can see their fellow humans as humans and just treat them as objects of their frustration or anger or rage, actually if you look back in their lives, there's been an absence of play. So for our own social cohesion, if we look at it from a utilitarian point of view, there has to be that space to play, an ability to play. But we live in a world where childhood is changing, as Naomi will be coming back to later. And it's changing very, very fast. And this is something we often forget, this changing quality of being a human being. And it's the children that really, in a way, take the brunt of that changing world, changing so rapidly around us. I'd like to give a little example of the change with birds, not with children for the moment. There's a wonderful little Australian bird called the silverthroat. And scientists have been observing its song. And they've noticed that this bird, the pitch of the song over the last few years has been increasing. It's singing at a higher and higher tone. And at the same time, the phrasing of its song is longer. It's spread out. So a higher tone and longer. And I wonder why this is with these birds. Why? How can their song change? And it's because they live in cities. And they have to overcome the sort of rumble of cities' life in order to understand each other. But meanwhile, these birds have cousins in the countryside whose song is not changing because they've just got cows and sheep and kangaroos. So it's not very noisy. So you've got this quality. And so the city birds don't understand the town birds. Now this has happened in a period of about 5 years. Evolution can be fast. We tend to think of evolution, we see the Darwinian tree going back to, out of Africa, going right back to the primates and all of that. It seems to take a long time when we look at these trees. But in fact, evolution is now 2.5 years earlier than it was 120 years ago. So childhood has been shortened by 2.5 years in just over 100 years. And it is still going earlier and earlier and earlier. It's universal and nobody knows why. But it means childhood is shorter because all the emotional and sexual drives that were there when you used to be on 16 now come as about the age of 10, some children, 10 and a half. So the whole emotional life of puberty is come down earlier, and this changes. Our childhood is shorter. The age we have of being a real child has shrunk. So it's even more valuable and more precious than it was before. So this is an extraordinary change in humanity. And it shows that we bring about a change in our evolution without knowing why or understanding why, where it comes from. And it's not just in one particular Western society, it's something that encompasses the world. And we could imagine reasons for it. But it just shows that if we don't, we have to change the way we work with children. We can't go back to the old ways anymore because those children no longer exist in the same way. And this means our childhood is also very different from the childhood of today as well. It's not just the computer and the smartphones and the rest of it that's changed, but also the physiology of childhood has also changed, the hormones and everything else. I'm going to tell a little bit of a story from the Petit Prince, The Little Prince, by Saint-Exupéry. Remember, this little prince wants to discover the universe. And he wants to learn, as all children do. He's got curiosity. And at one point he ends up on a planet, one little planet, where there's a geographer. And this man is sitting there, an elderly man with a white beard, and he's sitting at his desk with a big book, the geographer. And the boy asks, what? He said, I'm a geographer, said the old gentleman. What is a geographer? A geographer is a learned man who knows where all the seas, rivers, towns, mountains, and deserts are located. Now that's interesting, said the little prince. Here is a real profession at last. It is certainly beautiful, your planet. Does it have oceans? I can't tell, said the geographer. Ah, the little prince was disappointed. And mountains? I can't tell, said the geographer. And towns, and rivers, and deserts? I can't tell you that either, said the geographer. But you're a geographer. Quite so, said the geographer, but I'm not an explorer. I need explorers. And then he goes on to say he needs explorers to tell him what's in the world, but he never can quite trust them, because they either are making it up or they're drunk. So he's got this very cynical attitude to what the explorers brings in. And then he decides he wants to know about the planet the little prince came from. Well, said the geographer, expectantly. Oh, where I come from, it's not very interesting, said the little prince. Everything is small. I have 3 volcanoes, 2 are alive and the 3rd is extinct. But one never knows. One never knows, said the geographer. I also have a flower. We don't take note of flowers, said the geographer. Why ever not? They're prettier than everything else. Because flowers are ephemeral. They come and they go. Like our childhood. This ephemerality of childhood, which the geographers don't know. Because it's transient. It's the moment. It's just then and there, gone. And this is not of interest to the geographers of the world. And if we want to work with children, we must make sure we're explorers. Not necessarily drunk, but explorers, not geographers. All written down in our papers, our academic books, our scientific, whatever research. We have to go beyond that and explore this world of childhood and recognise that what is ephemeral, what doesn't stay, is as important as what does stay. This is lovely, and this flower, the most important thing in the child's life is this flower. Yeah, in his imagination, like embellish, be this flower, and yet it's disregarded by the geographers of the world. And I like the Little Prince because it really brings out this language of child, this quality of language, where there's complete disjunction between the words of the adult and the image of the world of the adult and the image of the world of the child, and the communication then suffers. You all know of Radio Emilia, of course, and Malaguzzi and his work there. And there, of course, he speaks about all these languages of childhood. And Rinaldi, Carlino Rinaldi, who now is responsible for that work since Malaguzzi died, says, "The cornerstone of our experience is the image of the child as rich, strong, and powerful. They have the desire to grow, curiosity, the ability to be amazed, and the desire to relate to other people." So this concept of the rich child, whereas we're living in a world where the model is of a deficient child. If we look at our education system, it just looks at what the child cannot do, not what the child can do. It's a deficiency model, whereas we, I think, have more and more, especially since the declaration of the Convention of the Rights of the Child in '89, have to fight for the model of the rich child, what the child brings. It said, used extraordinary words there, if you think about it. The cornerstone of our experience is the image of the child as rich, strong, and powerful. Not a word, powerful, that one often comes across in discourse about childhood. Yeah. Politicians or generals perhaps, but children as a power. Children recognized as co-creators of our world. Have a deep influence on our world. And sometimes we don't notice it. You don't notice how children take you by the hand. I can give one example just from my own life. Something happened 7 or 8 years ago. A little child in Madrid called Alexa. She was sent to a kindergarten and she didn't like it. The family were professional, politician, journalist, quite high-powered Madridians, and she was in a conventional kindergarten. It didn't work. So they looked around Madrid, and then they found a little Steiner kindergarten, Steiner Waldorf kindergarten, and they said, a little girl there. And she just beamed. She was happy. This is her home, because their playfulness and play was the essence of every day in the story. And everything. And her grandfather was a consultant to a Spanish foundation. And this Spanish foundation had the role of developing education in the north of Spain, in Cantabria. And they came across the concept emotional intelligence. And they wanted to try and embed that in the educational system in Cantabria as a foundation. And they told the grandfather of the little girl. And the grandfather told his daughter. And his daughter told his teacher that this foundation was looking to try and see how they could embed emotional literacy into the education in Cantabria. And the kindergarten teacher happened to know. And she said to the mother of the girl, "Go to Christopher." So I was invited to make a proposal of what this foundation could do to become part of the world of social emotional learning. And I then took on a research job across the world in the last 8 years. Never met, influenced so deeply my life. It wasn't a plan that I had. It wasn't something I formulated or was going to do, or an ambition, nothing. Just a little girl, unhappy in the kindergarten, who I didn't know, led me by the hand and gave me a wonderful opportunity to see the world in a new way and create new colleagues everywhere. And these are moments you have to recognise and be grateful for. Yeah? And it's not the grand plan things, but children do lead us. Children take us by the hand. So often we think, I've seen it in shopping malls on Saturdays, the children being dragged along. Yeah? We have to look at the side. Yeah. And I think that's, again, as I said earlier, a bit of the danger of our modern education system, that we close the door. And then if the children can't exercise their imagination, then of course they can't speak. Then we don't have the languages of the child, which we need. As they are co-creators of the world, that's a language we actually do need. So I see I better come towards an end. Yes. So I just quickly jump to another poem. Okay? Because childhood is about poetry. In the poetry that it's often an ignored art nowadays in many ways, but we can re-find those qualities in childhood in poetry, because poetry changes relationships. There's a fluidity in poetry. There's different levels of meaning because of the context and the word's ability to evolve and transform itself because it's related to another word. The word is no longer a prison. The word is no longer a box. The relationship transforms. Same letters, same sounds, but not the same word, because it's next to someone else, another word. And this is from a Welsh poet called R.S. Thomas. And it's about looking at children and listening to children. We live in our world, a world that is too small for you to stoop and enter, even on hands and knees, an adult subterfuge. And though you probe and pry with analytic eye, and eavesdrop all our talk with an amused look, you cannot find a centre where we dance, where we play, where life is still asleep, under the closed flower, under the smooth shell of eggs in the cup nest, that mock the faded blue of your remoter heaven. We live in this world of the faded blue. Our heaven is remote. It's the blue of the mind. That's why I asked that to be switched off. That's the blue of the remoter heaven. That Microsoft background that was there just before. The children, it's the blue of the sky. But it's nice we cannot, with an analytic eye, we can't find where they dance, where they play, the centre of childhood, the imagination of the cupped nest with the eggs inside it. Even if we bend down, get right down, we can't see it if we're just analytical. We live in a world that is too small for you to stoop and enter, even on hands and knees, the adult subterfuge. And though you probe and pry with analytic eye, and eavesdrop all our talk with an amused look, you cannot find the centre where we dance, where we play, where life is still asleep, under the closed flower, under the smooth shell of eggs in the cupped nest, that mock the faded blue of your remoter heaven. We have to rediscover that blueness of the world, that it's not faded anymore. Our experience, our lives, our work, our tribulations, all the rest of it, that can fade the blue. But the child experiences the blue in a very human and lively way. And if we want to understand children, we have to go back to that. We have to refine that blueness and the quality of all the colours of the world, in whatever form, whatever we call a colour, all the colours of the world again. And then we can hear what our children are telling us, whether they do it in gesture, sparkle or dull luster of their eyes, in their expression on their faces, in their movement, in their play, in their language, and so on. To listen to them, we have to work on ourselves, not just work on children. We have to rediscover blueness, the power of colour, the powerfulness of colour. And the last thought comes from C.S. Lewis then, which I'll conclude. While science may lead you towards truth. Only the imagination can lead you towards meaning. Okay? Although science can lead you towards truth, only imagination can lead you to meaning. And without meaning, we can't hear the voices. So, thank you.